Welcome everyone to our Committee of the Whole meeting. We have quite a full agenda today, largely because we haven't met for a couple weeks. So our last meeting was in June, second week of June, I believe. So we had a little bit of a break, which is typical every year. So welcome to our Committee of the Whole. We have a number of briefings today before we get to our action items. So to start us off, we're going to have a partner update from a good friend and partner in our community, Peter from the John Ball Zoo. So Asante, are you teeing this up?
No, ma'am. Mr. Peter's going to get up here and speak.
Okay, wonderful. Well, welcome. It's good to see you. And many people know that the zoo is actually and the park is a county park, but it used to be owned by the city, but it's obviously in the heart of our city. And they're doing some great work in partnership with a number of other organizations. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bliss. Thank you for having me, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. As you all know, the zoo resides in Grand Rapids, and you're a key partner and stakeholder in our success, so we're really happy to be here. And I'm going to share some things about the zoo, and you may know many of these things already, but I'm hoping there'll be stuff in there that will surprise you, as since we have gone private, the way we're structured and how and why we do things has changed. So, and I'll break that up into three sections: a general overview, some partnership opportunities, and what we're doing next. So, location and size. I like talking about this slide because years ago, I'm told before I got to Grand Rapids that there was a talk about moving the zoo, and we're really in the perfect spot. I can't tell you how pleased I am that we didn't move. We have plenty of space. We actually have over 100 acres. The current developed zoo is 31 acres. If you're facing the hill, that's to the right. To the left is 40 undeveloped acres, and then out front is 30 acres for the park and infrastructure. But most importantly, we're in the heart of the city, and the zoos of the future must serve their community because we're not a wildlife sanctuary. Zoos play in the space of where society or where people and wildlife intersect. And to do that successfully, we have to be part of the community. So on an attendance standpoint, we're one of the most attended cultural attractions in the state of Michigan. On average, over 500,000 guests come to the zoo, and most of that is over the summer, where peak month we can do up to 120,000 people. And our park, just the park alone, has about 200,000 guests. Many are surprised to know our reach, though. Only 30% of our attendance comes from Grand Rapids. We actually have attendance from all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. And we always have attendance from all 83 counties. So we're not just a regional zoo. We actually play on the national space, and I'm very pleased to report that with a partnership with the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, this is the first year we're doing a national ad campaign to bring people to Grand Rapids. Another thing that people are surprised is that more people go to zoos each year than the combined attendance of professional football, baseball, basketball, and hockey. Yeah, I always get that response. And the reason why I like sharing that is people intuitively know, wow, a stadium brings a lot of people to a community, but zoos bring more than those four combined. So major economic driver, which I'll touch on in a minute. So our structure. We are the 10th oldest zoo in the United States at 128 years. But we're also a private organization. And one of the great things about the John Ball Zoo, it really embodies what makes West Michigan so special. It's that public-private partnership. That's exactly who we are. We're a private nonprofit, and we have a lease operating agreement with the county to manage their assets. And we do have a millage where we did about a third of our operating budget. And everything we build or fundraise for at the end of the year gets signed over to the county as an asset. So it's a perfect example of a public-private partnership. We're also fairly large from a staffing standpoint, a structure standpoint. We have 291 employees at peak staffing, which would be this time of year. That equates to 224 full-time equivalents, with about 100 of them being year-round employees. And we have over 200 active weekly volunteers, 500 volunteers in total, but 200 active weekly volunteers. Our operational budget is $14.5 million, with 2/3 of it coming from operations. And when we build new things, all of that comes from fundraising. So right now, we're finishing up meerkat habitat. And all of that comes from fundraising. None of it comes from the millage or revenue from operations. So when I talked about our community role, I like to frame it up on the why, the how, and the whats. And what we do, you've probably seen a lot of that. What we do is we create a place for families to spend time together. It's where a community gets together. We drive tourism. We educate. We do science leadership. We reach out to the community. Many other organizations have those whats, and that's great, and many people can play in the same space. But what is really unique is our whys and our hows. Our why is all about wildlife and the natural environment. And our how is our core values, which are conservation, education, community, and celebrate. And that's what separates us. So when I talked about the zoo, I always like to frame it up in our core values. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of those. Conservation. So we're an AZA accredited zoo, which stands for Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Less than 10% of the zoos in the United States achieve that standard. It's the toughest standard. It's the hardest one. And it really means that we're all about animal welfare. It means that we think the best place for animals is out in the wild, which sounds like we're trying to put ourselves out of business. But we do believe the best place for animals is out in the wild. And I'll talk to in a minute some of the challenges with that. But it also means that we're science focused. Our keepers have science degrees. We have over 30 biologists on staff. They're well educated. We have a few with master's degrees. We even have 2 doctorate degrees on staff. We do research. We do field work. We're under pressure to publish, to go through peer review. But the big thing about conservation is we're focused on saving animals from extinction. We participate in 44 species survival plans, and we provide leadership on 39 scientific taxonomic advisory groups. And one thing that we're doing differently than other AZA zoos, though, is our commitment to local conservation. Most zoos focus on Africa, Asia, South America, etc. We do those things, but we've made an intentional focus that 51% or more efforts will be in the state of Michigan. We do that for a variety of reasons. One, we want to keep our efforts local, but how are we going to ask someone to care about what's happening in Africa or South America if they're not aware of what's happening in their backyard? And with what's happening in your backyard, we can educate, we can lead on some easy steps where they can make a difference in their own community. So why is conservation important? Our mission is we inspire our community to be actively engaged in the conservation of wildlife and our natural environment. And why is that important? Currently, we're living in our planet's 6th mass extinction, and it's occurring faster than any other extinction in the past due to human activity. And you may be surprised, just because of what's in the news cycle, that the number one threat is not climate change. It's the loss of wild places. Climate change is serious. It's number 7. Those coupled together are causing the mass extinction. What do I mean by that? Thousands of years ago, before there were people, when the earth would warm, animals would simply migrate to a different climate. They can't do that now because there's an interstate in the way. There are cities in the way. So it's the loss of wild places. And when I say wild places, when you're driving down the highway and you see this beautiful wooded area, that's not really wild. A wild place has no roads through it, no shopping malls, no housing. Even the houses are miles apart. And the reason for that, an apex predator, such as a tiger, needs a 50-mile diameter for one tiger to survive. Wolves are very similar. It's why you don't see wolves. Well, we actually hunted them out, but besides that, why you won't see a sustainable wolf population in the lower peninsula. So, loss of wild places. And we would love to see animals in the wild. We do reintroduce animals back into the wild. We actually have successful breeding programs where animals go back into the wild. But in order for those animals to survive in the wild, we have to work with other partner organizations to ensure that land is set aside and protected so those animals can thrive. Education. We drive change by inspiring people and educating them. And I won't go into detail because we have so many education programs. But I think the takeaway is we reach about 50,000 students per year. And because we're science-based, our education programs are so strong that teachers can actually get their continuing education credits at the zoo. I can't pronounce this acronym. I think it's called STEACH, but State Continuing Education Clock Hours. So basically, teachers have to get professional development and then come to the zoo for that. So community, our third core value. Part of the community is having so many team members out in the community, the 225 full-time equivalents. It's also our volunteers, but it's also, the zoo is the community. We serve a diverse audience, and we have a diverse workforce, and we're growing those numbers. Our percent of staff diversity numbers have doubled in the last 2 years, but we also have very low turnover, which is great. It's great to have low turnover. So when a position opens up, it's difficult to move that needle. But I am pleased to say that the team has doubled those numbers, and we're partnering with GVSU on a diversity and inclusion plan to really drive that even farther. Zoos are also economic drivers. Our direct economic impact, according to a GVSU study, is $40 million. And I say direct because that's a lot easier to measure than indirect. And I think the key point to that is 67% of all spending is by non-Kent County residents. And the reason why that's important is it's about generating new wealth. So if someone opens a new restaurant down, let's say Fulton, a family is choosing between restaurant A and restaurant B. They're not bringing new money to the community. They're just moving money between one restaurant to another. But when you bring tourism from all 50 states, that's new money coming into the city. So it's wealth creation. Also, for zoos to serve their community, they must be accessible to all. So you're going to hear about universal design in the new playground we're building, but it's also about ADA paths. And we have the same elevation as the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, keyword Mountain Zoo. So we've been working hard the last 3 years making all our pathways at ADA grade or better. And I'm pleased to say that the final leg will be done this winter. So in the spring, the entire zoo, you'll be able to navigate the zoo in a loop on an ADA compliant path. We're also about workforce development, special needs job skills, youth development, mentorship programs, the Mayor's 100 and others. We also participate in community programs such as the West Side Cleanup. And I'm really excited about our JUMP program, which 3-year running average is 34,000 kids and families. And what that program is, if you're on a free or reduced school lunch, not just the child goes to the zoo for free, but the entire family, because zoos are about families. So we send a mailing to each home that with a child with a free or reduced school lunch, and they can take that. They can ride the Rapid for free and then attend the zoo as a family. So celebrate. Well, I mean, zoos are fun places, right? But the thing I'd like to take away from this is, and SMG here stands for Service Management Group out of Kansas City. I know there's an SMG here locally as well. But the number one reason that people go to zoos isn't to see the animals. It's to spend time with friends and family. And I find that very touching. And you can walk around the zoo on a Sunday afternoon, and you can see it. You can see 3 generations of families spending time together. Now, they are coming to see animals, but they're doing it because they want to spend time together as a family. So, and an AZA study, Association of Zoos and Aquariums, the most memorable moment is a person, a volunteer, a keeper, they spoke to the actual animal keeper, or a family member. AZA commissioned that study to try to find the top 10 animals that every zoo should have. And they were really surprised that the number one at the top of the list was spending time with a person. So we also know how to have fun. There's so many things that go on at the zoo, and I have a quick list there. So what are some new things that are happening at the zoo? this year alone, we're bringing in more than a dozen different animals. So we're growing, and we're growing fast. And we have a lot of exciting new animals coming. The meerkat exhibit is under construction right now. If you walk through the zoo, every day it looks different. And it's going to be one of the best meerkat habitats in the United States. And if you're curious what meerkats look like, I'm wearing a meerkat tie. So partnership opportunities. This is just a quick list of ways that we can partner in the community, and it's not meant to be everything. It's just stuff that we're already doing or stuff we've thought of. So my point is, if it's not on the list, please come talk to us, because we want to be part of the community. We can't be successful unless we're part of the community, because if we're really going to drive change to protect these animals from extinction, we really need to connect with the community. But I do want to highlight a few. Like under our conservation core value, I'll talk about the park that's being built out front of the zoo. But we also plant trees every year, and we also provide leadership and sustainability. Ullman Forester has been recognized nationally with a national award on sustainability efforts. And I could speak for an hour alone about all the different construction methods we're using, geothermal, stormwater treatment, but we're doing a lot of exciting things in that space. Our education opportunities, mentorship, possibly maybe a resource in schools, our nature play efforts in community, our D&I efforts, diversity and inclusion, the workforce development, and celebrating sponsorship and support of community programs, from exchanging tickets to the West Side cleanup to the fair that happens out front with the church. Opportunities are endless. So what's next?
All right, and Peter, I'm going to give you just like a 3-minute time.
Got it.
Only because we have 15 other items.
Okay,
So,
I'll go through it real quick.
I know this is great, and I'm so glad, but I want to make sure we also get to everything else.
All right. So the park, I'm really excited about what we're doing out front. And the objective is to make sure it's naturalistic, to engage the community. We thought we'd ask the neighbors what they actually wanted, and to support the city's park vision, a park within 10 minutes and increased tree canopy, and universal design. And there were some things about the park that kind of, when I started, that I was really surprised what was in the master plan. So if you've seen the old master plan, that's been thrown out. It had a bunch of parking out front, and we're a nature organization. Why would you want to put a concrete jungle out front? So the new plan has the parking in the back against the hill, and out front is 18 acres of parkland. And another thing that surprised me, and I know Michigan is known as like the automobile state, but we have this beautiful roundabout with a fountain for cars. How are kids and families supposed to sit by the fountain and reflect? The only thing you can do is drive by a car, look over your shoulder, and go, wow, it's a nice fountain. But so you'll see in the plan how we're making some changes so that can be a reflective space where families can walk together. I also wanted to show that we mailed over 5,000 invitations to homes because we don't know how the community wants to use it. We were hoping they'd want it as a neighborhood park, not a regional park, because we have Millennium. So we focused on a neighborhood park. This is an overview of the entire site and some proposed changes to the site. The park runs south or towards the bottom of the page, which is actually east of the main road. And then with feedback from the community, we actually increased the space. This area in green you can see is almost 20 acres. And some key highlights that we got back from the community is expanded courts and the new courts, basketball and tennis in the top left, a reflective garden with public art on the top to the right of the courts. And in that is going to be public art, and it's a place to reflect. It's a quiet, meditative space for prayer or just reflection. And then on the bottom left is a new universal design playground, which actually breaks ground in August and will be ready in September. And then we've moved the road to separate it from pedestrian and bike traffic. And you can see on the bottom right where that roundabout was. So the fountain stays, but now it's turning into some very manicured type gardens. The hash marks are the rain gardens throughout the space to contain stormwater so that not one drop of stormwater leaves the site on a 1-inch rain event. And the little dotted line there is a flexible open space. It's really for a soccer field because I played soccer for 10 years and I think it's the best sport. But so I want to make sure there's enough space for the community to get together and play soccer, but they might play other things like football or who knows. But oh, and then a new band shell, of course. And this is a blow up of the park. And in here are different elements for younger kids and older kids. And this is what we're doing in the front entry. And you can see the switchback path is the new final ADA path that goes up into the zoo. And there's some new animal habitats there, but in the interest of time, I'll keep moving. And also there's a new, well, I'm sure you know about all this, but there's a new bus line going in, and there's a bus stop in front of the zoo, and they've been great to work with on how do we customize this to give it a zoo feel, and you can see some planters next to it. It's going to have some zoo graphics, and one of the things we're excited to explore is that whoever comes to the zoo by bus will have their bus fare deducted from the admission price. And that's my presentation. And I'm happy to answer any questions if time permits.
Very nice. All right, commissioners? Commissioner O'Connor, this is in the heart of the West Side. You want to add anything?
No, it's always super exciting. I lived just a block from there for about 10 years, and just to see the transformation on the horizon and the investment being made into that, it always drove me crazy to see cars parked on grass. And so the fact that you're going to turn that into a beautiful active space that faces the neighborhood is just, I think, going to be another remarkable change for the neighborhood.
Thank you. And some other elements that I left out is we're putting some giant sculpted boulders along the perimeter so that cars can't jump the curb. And we're actually putting a berm between the existing playground and the park area with some rain gardens. So if a four-wheel drive vehicle tries to go over the berm, they'll get stuck in a watery marsh.
Well
Meaning
thought out.
we're going to be very deliberate to keep cars off that grass.
Well, Peter, thank you so much, not just for the presentation, but your leadership. We really appreciate it, and the partnership, I know, with a lot of our city departments and other organizations.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and please continue to provide us with updates, especially as the park design comes to fruition.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, commissioners, that will take us to our next presentation, and we'll get started with our very own Parks Director. And this is a Parks Millage update and presentation, and Mr. Mike Lamonaco will join David for this presentation.
Mayor, if I could,
Oh,
before we
sure.
start. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Just would ask the staff to be mindful of the time today, and if commissioners could hold their questions till the end, that might help us get through it.
Okay, thanks.
Very good. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, David Marquardt, Director of Grand Rapids Parks and Recreation. We came to you in December with a full update of the Parks Millage. Today we thought we would come back and provide you with a summary of where we are and where we stand. Just as a little bit of a reminder of the background on the Parks Millage, this was a 2013 voter-approved dedicated Parks Millage set at 0.98 mils. Annually, this generates about $4 million a year in dedicated funding. For a period of 7 years. Over that 7-year period, that's a $28 million investment into the Grand Rapids Park system. Expenditures were intended to be spent on capital investments, both for rehabilitation, repair, and for new amenities, and then a portion of which was set aside for keeping the 3 pools open and operational in the city of Grand Rapids. Current state, in the 5 years of the millage, we've invested roughly $14.5 million so far. In addition to that, this is a great statistic, we have leveraged over $16 million of outside funding to support that millage investment. And those are MD&R grants, private grants, and foundations that have stepped up to support our work. Remaining capital initiatives are estimated to be at about $41 million outside of the 7-year, $28 million investment. In addition to that, as a part of the 2017 Parks Strategic Master Plan, there are an additional aspirational capital initiatives totaling roughly $16 to $28 million in addition to that. The master plan also called out for operational needs. that exist beyond the investments that are currently being made. Mike, you want to jump in here? And I'm going to turn it over to Mike LaMonaco here. Thank you.
Thank you, David, Mayor, Commission. Thanks for having me. So I'm here representing an awesome collection of citizens from the city who have come together to help lead what we hope to be the renewal of the Parks Millage. As David said, it was a 7-year commitment from 2013, so we're coming right up here on the opportunity to renew this. And so our ballot initiative request is for the November of 2019. It is guided by an incredible amount of community input through the 2017 Adopted Parks and Recreation Strategic Plan, as well as partnership with various organizations, Friends of Grand Rapids Parks, and many of the neighborhood associations throughout the city. What we're seeking, we plan to ask for a 1.25 renewal amendment, and this to be an evergreen millage. What that looks like is about a $5 million annual revenue to the city parks. This proposed rate would cost the average homeowner in the city about $64 a year, or about $5 per month. That represents about a $15 annual increase from where we're at currently. And last but not least, our hope is that the administrative guidelines that were adopted in 2013 by the Commission would remain the same, with the exception of removing the percentage-based investments. We feel this will provide both the City Commission and city staff more flexibility and opportunity to invest in areas where they feel most appropriate. We are hoping that the Commission and leadership in the city and citizens will see that this money goes to, I'll say, really 3 main areas that we think are key to developing a world-class park system in the city. Number 1 is maintaining our current assets at a very high standard. Number 2 would be the continued commitment to keep our city pools open. And number 3 would be to look at opportunities for recreational program throughout the city for children and families. These 3 items represent the overwhelming amount of feedback we've received from our surveys we've done over the last couple months. Throughout each ward, the overwhelming amount of feedback has been to focus on these three opportunities in our city, and we're excited about that, and hope you are too. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at the end, and I guess just before I depart, I'll just remind that, now is not the time for us to take a step back. Again, this was only 6 years ago when we passed this millage, and I think all of us in this room can remember the state of our park system heading into 2013. And to see where we've come, David's data and just the experience of our parks today and where we will be going forward, we have an opportunity to do something great in the city. And I think a couple wise people have said, great cities have great parks, and couldn't agree more with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'll open it up for questions. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you for the report. I'm in favor of the park millage, and I'm in favor of the fact that it is important for us to have some recreational events for the neighborhood. But one of the most important things that I want to address is the maintenance of the parks. I think that's very important. Some of our parks are pretty rough looking, may I use that word. We got about, 74 parks in the city of Grand Rapids? David, maybe you can answer this question. How many parks do we have in the 3rd Ward?
I don't know that number offhand,
Okay.
Commissioner.
It is important for me that as we look at the parks that are in the 3rd Ward, especially J.C.'s Park, for example, needs some upkeep. Garfield Park needs some upkeep. Franklin needs some upkeep, which is King Park. So we're talking about improving the livelihood of the neighbors, children who attend those parks. Those parks need to be maintained with some proper maintenance. That's important. In order for a neighborhood to grow and have the recreation that it needs, the parks need to have a good look to it. I was very disappointed when we went to Joe Taylor Park, as I saw weeds around the front entrance coming in. I think there's a responsibility that we have to our community and the neighborhoods in which those parks are in to make sure those parks are clean. So
Commissioner.
I'm in favor. I just wanted to make sure I threw that out because
Thank you, Commissioner. And I don't know the number of parks in the third ward either, but what I do know is that we need more parks in the third ward. That's been identified as one of the parts of the city that
well,
is
we
deplete green
have some
space.
good parks in the third ward.
Yeah,
But
some
what
great
needs to
ones.
happen in the third ward, those parks need to be properly maintained
Yeah.
and cleaned up, and the green spaces need to be appropriate looking. That's my concern, and the programs that are going to be in those parks for the summer need to have adequate employees that can work with children, especially children from all different cultural backgrounds, so that we don't show any type of biases to those kids at all. So I'm putting that out there. If we're going to make the zoo look good, we better make the city parks look good too.
Excellent point. Very excellent. Commissioner?
I agree with Commissioner Moody. I think probably annually, I know I get a phone call about a few of the parks that you mentioned and their maintenance when there's a league of softball or baseball or something like that. So I agree with the maintenance. I do have a couple questions. The first one is, one of the slides mentioned $64 a year is what the millage would equate to in dollars and cents for homeowners. Can you talk about what the difference is for what people are paying now and the increase? Or is the $64 the increase?
No, the $64 represents about a $15 annual increase.
So it's a $15 increase,
Yep.
okay.
It's about 49. I just paid my
Correct.
property tax bill, and I think
Yep.
mine was like $46 a year.
Okay.
Went to the parks.
Sounds about right, yep.
Okay, so I think in future presentations, that would probably be helpful. I know we have frequently people contacting us, or even coming to our city commission meetings, asking us about the increases in their tax bills. And we've had to spend time helping people to understand the various millages. We just talked about the zoo, there's the senior, the parks is another one. So just trying to help people to understand where the taxes are going to. And I think, so that would probably be helpful. Just like Commissioner Moody, I'm, obviously very supportive of parks in general and in theory. I'm a mother and my kids love parks. I try to make every groundbreaking and ribbon cutting of every park, and not just in my ward, but I try and make it to those that are happening in the other wards too. I know when it was decided to put this on the ballot, that was the same year that I was elected as a commissioner in the August primary. So I didn't have an opportunity to weigh into it then. But I have expressed concern that, we are asking citizens to contribute to addressing parks, which I think is a really important thing to address. And like we talked about, the lack of green space in the third ward is obviously of a concern for me. But when I weigh that with an issue like lead across this entire city and having lead rates that are higher in the state of Michigan, located right here in 3 zip codes that are in the city of Grand Rapids across every ward, that's a really, really high concern for me. And so if I were home making a decision about which one would I invest in, I would likely choose addressing, lead and paint and things of that nature in my home, so that my children would be safe before I would landscape, for an example. And so, I'm struggling here for 2 reasons. Number one, because as much as I've talked about this, and this isn't your problem as much as you're just hearing it, and the public is hearing it because it just happens to be how we've talked about this, but I just think what I've said is we need to make an investment, even if we had talked about what the city's investment would be in addressing lead-based paint in homes, and have a plan in place, as opposed to continuing to talk about it, I probably would feel differently about this. And I just think that we have to make some decisions about other issues as we're continuing to have decisions about things that I consider extra credit and not the homework. So this isn't just this discussion. I talked about this same issue when we talk about river restoration, when we talked about greening the Calder, whichever direction it's in. So I'm struggling because I think that those things are important and we have not, as a body, addressed those things. The other thing is, not only are we talking about a renewal, but we're talking about an increase. And we have citizens who financially are struggling with already taking care of the responsibilities that they currently have. And so to have an increase of $15, maybe to you or to me or most of us in this room, that may not be a big deal, but to others it is. And because it's not just yours, it'll be another millage that we'll talk about next year. And those things continue to add up, and it becomes a concern for families. And I think it would be great to kind of hear why, number one, it's been chosen to increase it. And I don't think I heard that in the presentation. And then the second thing is, how are we trying to help families who are struggling and who may not have the opportunity, because this is an impact on housing. We have people talking to us about housing all the time and the affordability of housing. This is a part of that. If you're trying to own a home, this is a part of that. So I kind of want to hear a little bit about that too. Why the increase, and have you all thought about that? And have you polled people who are living in their cars, who are struggling to pay their tax bills? Because there are ways of finding out who they are and seeing what they think, as well as we're talking to the people who may have the resources to take care of it.
Good questions. And then I'll go to Commissioner O'Connor. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. They are great questions, and the ones that we very seriously weighed and had very serious conversations about. So one of the reasons for the increase is just the matter of that costs have increased to maintain our parks at the level that we expect them to be maintained. Our citizens have overwhelmingly asked for this level of maintenance and care, as well as, again, the commitment for the pools to stay open and for increased opportunity for recreational programming. Again, there's a lot of data that we can also go through as far as what that recreational programming can do for our community and for our neighborhoods. As far as the surveying and polling, we've done extensive surveying and polling, and in fact, the Third Ward has come back as the highest level of support in our polling that we've done for this rate and for an Evergreen. And again, the feedback overwhelming from each ward, and again, with Third Ward being highest, were those three areas of priorities. So that's what we're responding to. Again, it's a citizen-led effort. We have a fantastic group around that table that has been leading this up to this point, and we look forward to expanding that out further and deeper, and would love to hear your thoughts and insight, Commissioner, on how we can continue to reach even more folks to get their input on this. Absolutely. It's a community effort, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to see the questions of the survey, because I know that if someone were asked the question about what would they prefer to do, this or something else, it doesn't even have to be lead, they may have made a different choice.
Sure.
And I think, surveys can be skewed.
And in full
such.
transparency, as we ask questions around priorities for citizens, parks was not the number one, housing was. Parks was still quite high, but I think we would be disingenuous if we didn't say, housing was certainly a high priority in the city of Grand Rapids.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I have one more question.
Okay, let me get to Commissioner O'Connor, because he had his hand up next, and then I'll come back over here, and Commissioner Kelly as well. Go ahead, Commissioner O'Connor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mike and David. So I'm extremely enthusiastic about the idea of renewing and increasing this millage at a very, I think, reasonable rate. I think one of the things that excites me most about Grand Rapids is our ability to with the dysfunction that exists at the state and federal levels and the lack of funding that comes our way, when we see a problem in our community or see something that we want to see addressed, I think we've kind of taken it as a community onto our shoulders to say, if they're not going to give us the resources and the support we need at these other levels to do the things we know that our citizens want, we put that on our own shoulders, and I think we do that historically in a very fiscally responsible manner, whether that's our continued investment in our public school system or our zoo or our vital streets. We're still not fixing the damn roads at the state, but we're clearly fixing some roads here in Grand Rapids, and it's remarkable to see it. And so I think the Parks Millage from 5 years ago is a true example of how we walk into any of our parks. Are all of them to the levels that we aspire them to be? No, but I think when you walk into any pocket of a park in our community, you see investments that have been made to improve their quality, to improve their maintenance, to improve their accessibility. And so I welcome the opportunity to continue to make that investment and do this for the long term, to know that, you know, I think we've you know, right-sized our park system to the, you know, we still need more green space, but the parks we have, we've made the commitment to maintain them to a reasonable level. And so I know that I think this small increase, I think, you know, we've proven over the last 5 years that we can manage the public's dollars in a very responsible manner and actually leverage those dollars, as Mr. Marquardt pointed out, to really get great bang for the buck. That, you know, if my tax bill goes up $15 for the parks, there's going to be another $15 that comes from somewhere else that's going to have an even bigger impact. And so, you know, we love having our pools open, and this is going to ensure that those 3 pools in each of our respective wards are open in perpetuity, and children and families have access to, you know, the outdoors, to green space, to exercise, to programming. Those are really remarkable things. And yeah, I look forward to being a vocal supporter and champion of this endeavor.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Kelly, then Commissioner Moody.
Yes, a couple things. First of all, I agree that it was really important, and I appreciate Commissioner Lanier's bringing it up to emphasize that this is $15 additional. That's a huge misconception that people could have, and that's important. And I think that it is an investment that we need to spend in quality parks. The other thing is, I think that it's important to focus. I think that those numbers that we leveraged by spending 14.5 to date, we leveraged more than that, 16 million. That is impressive. And good work on the part of the staff for getting that done. We definitely need good parks, because I think that's where community comes together. In an age where we are so divided, I think public space provides those opportunities. And the other thing, and I really want to address those concerns that Commissioner Lanier expressed about lead. I lived in 49507 when my children were little, and my son was diagnosed with high lead levels. And one reason was that, unbeknownst to me, he was playing outside around the house, and we did some painting, and there was lead in the dirt. And so I think one of the positives about parks is that it does offer recreation for families and children. And that's what I'm really excited about too, that we can build all this infrastructure, but we need to use it. And families aren't going to use it if there aren't good bathroom facilities, if there aren't facilities for family reunions, maybe even weddings, which I'm always bringing up, but affordable options, affordable options for family reunions, for opportunities for kids to play that are safe and lead-free. We didn't have that opportunity at that time, and fortunately I learned how to, you know, clean the windowsills, keep my child out of that space. But I do think that that is something that we could emphasize in terms of selling the parks, is to go to a place where your kids can play, they can get fresh air, they can get away from video games and sitting at home and exercise and have educational opportunities. So I'm especially excited about this for not only continuing what we've been doing in adding parks in the 3rd Ward, but in particularly getting families out there to really use this space. And I think that's where programming comes in providing the space and the amenities in that space that we haven't done to date.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Moody?
Yeah, I appreciate what Commissioner Kelly just said in reference to the use of bathrooms in parks. That's what I was kind of alluding to earlier, is that the maintenance includes all of that. The other thing I want to ask, that in this millage, are cemeteries included? That might sound a little bit morbid to some, but are cemeteries included in this millage?
Cemeteries.
Because cemeteries are considered parks, am I not right?
So yeah, so the millage dollars specifically are not going towards the cemetery.
Okay, all right, then that needs to be made clear from my standpoint, because when I look at a cemetery, for example, if we say Woodlawn Cemetery is a park, then people do frequent the cemetery, and they do consider cemetery a place to go for some meditation and loved ones and remembering loved ones, and then cemeteries need to be kept up too. So if we're going to do one, let's do them all.
Thanks. Commissioner Jones, did you have anything to add?
I just want to say that I want to thank the these gentlemen for the presentation. I think that, I know that for the original millage, I was very much out in front and active in promoting the importance of it. I think that it goes without saying there are myriad benefits with regards to the parks. And I am yet sensitive to the need to make sure that it's very clearly articulated that this is an increase. And just to be very transparent in terms of why it's increased. I think that most folks will understand that, as time passes on, things become a little bit more expensive. And so I'm looking forward to engaging with the process, and I'm hopeful that we can have it passed by a landslide. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yep.
And to Commissioner Moody, I just want to iterate too, as far as the commitment for cemetery maintenance, that is out of the general operating fund.
I know.
And so, so
Yeah.
not specific to the.
I just want to throw it out there so to be in your mind, so next time you want something, think about the parks as well.
Yes, thank you.
So Commissioners, this is a presentation, this is the public presentation. The next item is to set a public hearing and give the community more time to provide input on this request to put this on the ballot in November. So we're not voting to do that today. This is to just really tee up a public conversation. And then the next item you see is to set a public hearing again to give people an opportunity to speak. And I want to follow up on what Commissioner Lanier said. In no way, in my opinion, does support for the parks minimize our dedication to solving the issue with childhood lead poisoning. I continue to think that there are opportunities to find funding that doesn't necessarily have to come out of the pockets of our residents to solve a problem that was created not by our residents. So again, I want to just be clear. I know everyone around this table cares deeply about multiple issues. So I just want to make sure that that's said really clearly.
I just want to speak to the maintenance piece. I think Commissioner Moody and even Commissioner Kelly's point about maintenance, I think in the past, there was an expectation, you're right, that general funding, I think even the maintenance was supposed to come out of the general fund as opposed to through the millage. And I think there was an expectation that because the parks were being updated through the millage, that the maintenance, we would see the results of maintenance being stellar because the funding wasn't going to be stretched. And because maintenance has never risen to the level of some of the changes that we've made, that's part of why this discussion is important, that we need to talk about what the plan is going to be for maintenance so that I don't have reoccurring callers, because I won't be around for a while, but obviously someone else can take them, but, calling about the same, like literally it's like clockwork. I get a phone call as soon as that group starts their baseball series. And so, things of that nature, we have to talk about how we're going to do better with the maintenance so that people understand that the dollars that are going into the infrastructure side of it, we're able to do better on maintenance because of it. And I think, Mayor, I understand what you're saying. I think the issue for me is that there are so many issues. So when there's a survey about one particular topic, a citizen is responding to a topic. I don't have the luxury of doing that. So when I make decisions, part of how I make my decisions isn't just about that issue. I have to kind of think of a full landscape. That's how I see my role. And so for me, I agree. I think that there are other ways, but we have not talked about those commitments yet. And we've been talking about this for a while. And so for me, I'm just ready to see us talk about what those commitments are and make some action there. Because maybe it is, I think Commissioner O'Connor said it best, we are okay with sometimes putting our money where our mouth is when someone else isn't going to do what they need to do. And if we had the opportunity to make a selection in this instance, because I've talked about it again with other issues too, maybe we choose abating lead in homes. The city has not, I cannot repeat this enough, even though we've filtered funding from the federal government through the city to abate lead in homes, we have not committed, ever, knowing that this has been a problem for over 30 years, ever, to abating lead in homes. Shame on us. Your son wouldn't have had to go through this if the city had committed to addressing this, perhaps. And that's what I'm getting at. So we can talk about a whole lot of issues and it just becomes a different priority. So the next priority will be something else. It was, weed a few months ago. Now it's this. It'll be something else and it'll just keep trickling. And we just need to stop and make a decision about how we really are going to address lead. And that would bring contentment to me, personally.
Thanks, Commissioner. All right, any other questions? Okay, so I will move to the next resolution, and this is a resolution to set a public hearing to receive comment on reviewing and amending the Parks Millage request. So this would set the public hearing for our next meeting.
So move.
Support?
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next, we have our mobile GR department coming up for another item that has been worked on for quite some time, and that is the draft bicycle action plan update. So, Kristen and Josh.
It's under PowerPoints.
Good morning, Mayor Bliss,
Good morning.
Commissioners, City Manager. We're here today to give you an update on the bicycle action plan. And so the most of the work that actually was completed by staff was by the end of last year, but we put a pause on it to coordinate that work with the city strategic plan, which you worked on so diligently earlier this year, and then of course the fiscal plan that followed. So the final plan that you have, and we left documents for you there, includes those strategic plan priorities and objectives, those that relate to bicycling either directly or indirectly. And then also we've done some updates related to the bike share and micromobility portion of the plan, since that industry keeps changing so dramatically. And then we're also utilizing this document as part of our mobility strategic plan that's moving forward as well. So why did we develop a bike plan for the city of Grand Rapids? Number one, it was a request from Commission that we develop a plan that was more comprehensive and that covered all types of, so the whole gamut of items, not just the facilities and engineering, but education, encouragement, safety and enforcement, and evaluation and planning, ongoing planning. We also have been developing our bike network fairly opportunistically with other projects, which has grown our network to about 91 miles of trails and bike lanes and other types of facilities, but has left some connectivity challenges and gaps, which was well noted by the public when we talked to them. We have a growing use of people using bikes year-round, and there's an increasing demand for people wanting to have more options to travel. We did a lot of resident engagement and gathered a lot of input. We did focus groups with our partners at Link Up and Hispanic Center. We had an online survey, we had a map comment tool online, and we attended several dozen community events and meetings where we talked to several thousand residents out at their, meeting with them within their neighborhoods. And then we also gleaned a lot of input from our Vital Streets Plan process, the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, the age-friendly communities listening sessions that have been going on, as well as GR Forward, our area-specific plans, and the quarter plans that we have in some of our business districts. So we obviously had a draft plan that was reviewed last summer. It was out for public input. We did a briefing to, obviously, you last summer, the Planning Commission as well, our internal design team, as well as DGRI, Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. We had a public hearing for last August, and then our Vital Streets Oversight Commission, because we are proposing changes to some of the mode emphasis in the Vital Streets Plan. They took a very diligent look at those proposed changes at their August, September, October, and then November meetings when they approved, or they recommended approval of those proposed changes that are included in the bike plan. As I noted, the draft public comment period for the document was last summer into fall. We received comments that sort of largely grouped around three themes. One was people are very interested, thanks for developing this plan. Can we get moving on it, approve it, and implement the plan? There was people who had sort of somewhat interested. Their big concerns, though, were still around safety, getting people to follow rules of the road and share that space better, improved maintenance, and then how should we implement this plan, fund this plan. And then, of course, there were some people that this was not a priority to them, and that was documented as well. They felt there were other issues, or they weren't interested in biking. So one of the things that we asked during our public engagement was, we'd have over 1,000 responses to this question, what's your one word about bicycling? There are a lot of people who felt it was growing and had a lot of potential, but unfortunately there was a lot of dominating words related to safety and concerns about it being risky, and that sometimes it was difficult or disconnected. And we heard that loud and clear throughout all those engagement activities, people wanting something more comprehensive with a plan. They wanted things that were more connected. We need to address barriers and gaps. They have a high level of discomfort riding with traffic. This is not just here, this is around the country, so they were asking for more trails, separated bikeways away from traffic, and developing a network on lower traffic routes. Safety, like I said, was a big concern. We heard concerns about road rage and distracted drivers, needing to maintain the network year-round. People are using our system year-round and need to be able to count on it as transportation. More bike parking needed citywide. Big concern about bikes being stolen and not having parking where they need or want to go. Access to equipment came up, certainly, where people may not have the opportunity to go to a local shop and purchase something or have a retailer nearby to get something as basic as a set of lights or a helmet or a lock to lock that bike. Wanting to have opportunities to learn how to ride or relearn how to ride. We heard that one. Had maybe ridden as kids or teenagers but hadn't done it for a while. Most people felt it was a good thing for the community and that it was something that was important in Grand Rapids. So we developed a vision based on those things, that we focused on safety, comfort. This is something that's integral to daily life. It's not a niche activity, and that it's available to people of all ages, abilities, and socioeconomic levels and genders. So our Bike Action Plan goals were developed prior to the strategic plan priorities and actually relate fairly well in terms of focusing on connectivity and safety, improving connections to community and comfort, and so mobility, safe community, health and environment, and then of course that overarching goal of equity throughout the whole strategic plan relate well to our Bicycle Action Plan goals. We then whittled it down into 10 recommendation areas where we focus on things like project and programs delivery, planning and continuing performance metrics and reporting. Of course, bike facility design, as that continues to change. The most, the key thing with being the network of bike facilities, but also things like safety and enforcement, bike parking and other end-of-trip facilities. Bike share is a component, and that's in the Appendix E. You'll see the full bike share feasibility study that we did in partnership with DGRI. Bike information resources, programs and activities, and then maintenance and operations being a very important one, as we heard a lot about the need for improved maintenance. As I noted, there's proposed changes to the Vital Streets Plan with a number of streets modifying their mode emphasis, either adding a mode emphasis, perhaps shifting one from one street to another to improve the connectivity of the network. So that's the lion's share of those type of improvements. And like I said, the Vital Streets Oversight Commission, after a very detailed review, did approve those proposed changes at their meeting, recommended for your consideration. We have currently around 91 miles of existing facilities within the city that the city maintains. This doesn't include ones that maybe Kent County might maintain. And then we've proposed doing improvements or adding new facilities to about 181 miles of roadways and trails. There's about 28 miles of existing facilities that we're recommending that we upgrade or change. So that kind of takes away from that initial mileage, and then total, we'd have a network of around 244 miles. And notably, we've kind of shifted the network in the final output to being about 2/3 of it being on lower stress facilities, so focused on trails, separated bikeways, and low traffic bike boulevards and neighborhood streets. So really what people were asking for would be the bulk of the network moving forward. So the outcomes of this process, obviously, is to provide a comprehensive bike plan for the city that's connected to that Vital Streets Plan, our other city plans, certainly advances our strategic plan, and is, of course, responsive to our public's input. We've defined that bike riding network, and we've also defined a lot of other programmatic areas that support people's use of bicycling as a form of transportation and recreation, and recommended specific directions and programs. Our short-term work program, we didn't detail this in the plan, but we talked about doing annual programs. We want to focus on developing annual work programs, doing some implementation, continue that implementation with Vital Streets and other projects we have programmed, establish a bike parking program, seek more community partners to continue driving change, which has been our successful bicycle safety, motorist safety program, develop and issue our request for information and proposals for a pilot system for bike share soon, and then also focusing on partnering more with our Public Works Department on year-round maintenance solutions. So we've brought 2 resolutions. Those are targeted for the July 23rd meeting to both amend our Vital Streets plan for those mode emphasis maps and then bicycle action plan approval. We are going to be incorporating this effort into our economic development and mobility strategic plan, and then looking to develop that RFI and RFP for pilot services for bike share and micromobility services moving forward. So, if you have any questions or need additional information?
All right, I'll turn to my colleagues. Commissioners, Commissioner Moody, did you have a question?
Yeah, the question that I have is that, for example, if I wanted to, I know you're going to have maps available for people who want to ride their bikes.
Correct.
And what are the rules for me in riding my bike in certain areas of the city of Grand Rapids? The helmets are important.
They're not required, but they're a
Yes.
valuable safety tool for sure.
So will there be a manual that tells me as a citizen what I need to be aware of in riding my bike through the city of Grand Rapids?
Well, we incorporated a information resources section into this. So one of the items was a map. We are actually utilizing some materials right now as part of some of our mobile GR outreach in partnership with the Bike Coalition. It's like during Active Commute Week and some of the classes that we're partnering on through the Recreation Services program. That kind of material is getting out, but I think a lot of it's like, how do we get it out to more people? And some of that's covered in information resources recommendation area.
Yes, I thank you. This is very good. The other thing I want to ask, and maybe this might go to Vital Streets, license for bikes. Do we require a license for bikes or not?
No, and that's not common anywhere in the United States. Sometimes they'll do bike registration so that people can track their bike in the event it's stolen. But even a lot of cities have gotten away from doing a licensing of any kind simply because of the cost factor.
So are we registering our bikes here in the city of Grand Rapids or not?
We don't require it anymore.
Well, we used to though, right?
Yeah.
Gonna have a lot of bikes on the road.
Yeah. City Manager?
Well, I think if we wanted to further regulate that, that would be a good problem to have at that time, but I don't think we're at the point yet where we, at least on that part, but when we talk about bike share and other forms of public sharing, we certainly want to regulate those, and that's what we will be piloting, how we regulate that. I just wanted to be clear on the expansion of the bicycle network on that slide 14. It's pretty aggressive, and essentially what we envision is almost tripling the bicycle network, and I just wanted to be clear that this is the master plan for it, but we need a near-term plan and how many miles of network are we going to be expanding in the first year, the second year, third year, so that the public won't have an expectation that all of a sudden we're going to have this huge expansion of bike infrastructure right away. And so perhaps if you or Mr. Nairn can elaborate on that. We talked a little bit about that being realistic, about the implementation part of it, and you mentioned that, but I would like you to emphasize that again.
Sure. So I went back and took a look at least what's currently programmed in the next 3 years under Vital Streets and some of our federal aid projects in which we couple those dollars together. We have about 16.5 potential miles of new facilities that could align with those projects that are currently programmed, and then about another 8.5 miles of upgrading or improving of existing facilities just in that 3-year window of what we know is programmed. That excludes any efforts to do things outside of Vital Streets projects, or if that changes, but those were just those targets.
And if you could just clarify how in some cases the expansion of one thing results in a reduction of another,
Sure.
the corollary.
Exactly. So in some cases, a good example would be, we recently had a change on the Century. Avenue. So we had bike lanes on Century, we still do all the way down to Burton. We had a water project, a substantial water project, reconstructed the road. We took the opportunity to create a separated bikeway on that portion, because that's the long-term push, is to change that from in-street bike lanes to separated bikeway, because we have kind of a very long street that doesn't have a lot of cross conflicts. And it provides more of an urban trail and a separated bikeway. So we took advantage of that. So we've reduced that bike lane mileage, but increased and added some separated bikeway mileage.
Thank you. All right, Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner?
I have a question about safety. So in your word graph, it talked about safety was an issue for people. So how are we, actually the slide that it was on is, dangerous was the word I was looking for, but the slide we were on is we're expanding. I'm just curious, how are we attempting to reduce people's perspective of riding bikes? Because I don't think, we've already tried build them and they'll come, and they haven't yet. And they're telling us why they haven't, and this graph tells us that. So to keep adding more doesn't automatically equate to people will start riding bikes if these things are still concerns for people. So I'm curious to know, I know that on Monroe, you have the 2-lane biking path, and I think that model is a model that creates more safety, and I think people feel safer in spaces like that. But Monroe is relatively wide, so there's capacity to do that there. But that doesn't mean that there'll be capacity to do that on many of the streets that you have in your map. So I'm just curious to know, how are we going to keep people safer so that we're not, the chart that had the additional miles that will be increased, we knew that our 100 miles of bike highway or bike lanes or whatever was more than what Chicago has. And we do know that this city could be dropped in Chicago's footprint probably 10 times. So to have 3 times the amount that they have in Chicago seems even more excessive. And many of you have already heard me talk about the 100 was excessive because we have not done it well. We'll start them and then cut them off, and then they'll pick up on a totally different block. So I just think, the increase in the miles seems like where we keep, that's our target, as opposed to creating the best comprehensive bike highway for the city. And then whatever that works out to be, then that ends up being whatever the miles is. It's almost like we have a goal about a number or a quantity before we have the right goal about where they will be. And people, we had a committee that talked about this a couple years ago, and people have talked about their concerns. And these aren't just people who are drivers who never ride a bike. These are bikers talking about their concerns, not riding their bikes. They're riding on sidewalks because of safety issues, with bike lanes right in front of them on the roads, and they're just not using them. So it just seems like our order is a little bit out of order.
Well, we didn't focus on a number. Staff focused very purposely, number one, on building connectivity and density. So some of the things that we've started to see and write research around the country about bicycling is that connectivity has the most positive impact on safety. And then density actually has the most positive impact on increasing ridership. And so when you couple the two together, a connected, dense network, you likely end up with having both. And we're starting to see also that when you have separated facilities or lower stress facilities and lower volume streets that are well connected, we're also seeing that in general, safety for bicycling is going up, ridership is going up, and then also general safety for transportation is improving. That's some of the latest research. So we focused hard on building separated bikeways, adding more trail, and then substantially adding a secondary street network to add that layer of connectivity. So you'll see we focused hard. And so when we have 2/3 of the network is focused in those 3 areas, and we're never going to get away from having some streets with standard bike lanes. Every city will have them. we don't have the right-of-way, just like a lot of places. But if we can create that secondary network that serves that purpose and also still has those connectivity on the main streets for direct connections or the places that we can't connect.
So there will not be any physical structures that will protect people and keep them safe? It's
For separated
mostly about the connectivity that you're thinking will drive safety?
Yeah.
Now, for separated bikeways, that's truly separating. So like the Monroe
Okay.
Avenue Bikeway facility or Century is separated off the side of the road. We've talked about raised bike lanes on some streets. And then off-street trails, of course, are sort of Plaster Creek Trail or Hastings Trail or some of the other ones that we either have or are working on to develop, or the Grand River Edges Trail. But bicycle boulevards or secondary street networks are following local streets for the most part, and then you're making improvements to traffic calming within those areas to avoid cut-through traffic, keep speeds down, and then improving major intersections to, I mean, I use a proposed bike boulevard every day to get to and from work, and I can take about 3/4 of my commute to work on a pretty low-stress environment, which is great. And then that last stretch, I got to make it on Franklin or Wealthy to get to the office. So, you know, I've got a pretty nice ride most of the way, and then I've got that last stretch that it's going to need some improvement at some point. But that was the focus. It was really not on the number. And these numbers may change over time. I think that some of this is that it's going to be, flexing with as development changes, and as we kind of work through our street projects. There's a lot of opportunity to keep whittling this down. And we did make a recommendation to revisit this plan in at least 5 years.
Well, we've been in need of a comprehensive plan for a long time, so this is a step in the right direction. And I it's been a couple weeks since I've read this in full because it's quite lengthy. And I haven't seen the data recently, but I thought I recall that we have seen an increase in bike ridership in the city over the last couple of years. Is that accurate?
I don't know about the last couple of years, but our last census data shows that we've increased about 3 times. So from the previous census to now, that is only commute trips. So that's a very specific number, and it's less than 20% of trips are usually your commute trips. And getting data about how people travel is not the easiest sometimes. I remember this coming up at our Vital Streets meeting, and I said, by the time I get home today, I'll have taken 10 trips on my bike, and only 2 of them will have officially counted, if you will. And so a lot of that is we were probably missing a lot of trips and not estimating as well as why people are making trips. And I know when we were out having community conversations, it wasn't just the recreation trips or the fitness trips. Those are fun and important, and people wanting to explore their city and their neighborhoods was a really important thing, spending time with friends and family. But also getting to grocery stores was really important, running errands, a lot of focus on, giving independence to high school students, college students, but we also saw even seniors looking for opportunities to continue to stay active and engage in their community. So we kind of heard the gamut, but it was a lot of positive input.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I just have one about how we might be working with the Parks Department once there are recreational activities, how to get to the park. I know you've talked about providing some of those networks within the neighborhood that are safe for families because they don't feel comfortable getting in the
Right.
bike lanes on the busier streets. But tying that into the opportunities at parks would be, I think, a wise move as well, just to
Yeah,
encourage
we have
use
a
of
meeting on the
both.
calendar to sit down and talk about how do we connect our plans together fairly shortly, and then also kind of syncing our work activities, because their mission, of course, is very much recreation and we want to use a lot of those facilities as a means for transportation as well, in terms of trails. But then parks are often a major destination, whether it is for fun, or maybe there's a farmer's market, or there's a concert or something else, and trying to get opportunities for people to engage at those places and using a bike. We didn't do the data analysis, but we can, but a lot of the bike routes, especially the bike boulevards, pass along or next to schools and parks in particular. We were very focused on those, as well as sort of the back doors to some major employers as well. So,
Good.
Great,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Commissioners, any other comments?
Appreciate this.
All right.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Okay, so next we'll go to our next item, and I'm going to actually start this with turning it over to our city manager. So, city manager, do you want to tee this up? This is a transmittal of Cure Violence Program Assessment Report and budget options.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I'll attempt to be brief. In light of the recent incidents that we've had around gun violence in our community, I mentioned at our press conference at Joe Taylor Park that we were already planning to bring an update to the commission in regard to evidence-based violence prevention program. If you recall, back in November last year, we talked about several things around improving public safety in our community in response to 21st century police recommendations. This assessment of evidence-based violence programs was another strategy, as well as looking at our deployment study and a couple other methods. So what we've done is Cure Violence was on site in December of last year, and they worked with staff. I want to thank my staff for the work that they've done. Santi Kane had led that effort along with several other departments to include Community Development Department and the Police Department and several others, because we recognize that this is not just a policing issue. And they will be here on the 23rd to provide a update briefing on their report. The city has not responded to their recommendations. We wanted them to be here to publicly present, but in light of what was occurring in our community, we thought it was good timing to talk about some alternatives to violence prevention, not specifically to this report, but to make sure you had the report and are prepared for their update. But there are several other things, and I'll ask the police chief and our parks director to come forward in light of everything that's going on. What are some other things we're doing at this moment to prevent violence? So again, this is not specifically in response to the recommendations, although there are some tangential things that we are doing. As you read the report, Cure Violence recommended a range of options in their assessment, and I would feel more comfortable if they were here to present it today. Unfortunately, they could not be here. They will be here on the 13th. But we have a lot to consider regarding their recommendations of whether or not we want to identify a local implementer and whether or not there are some other funding collaborations that are available for private donations that might want to fund some of the options. But real quickly, before we talk about that, I'd like Chief Kittle just to briefly give us an update on what we are doing now, absent this study, in terms of trying to both enforce and prevent violence. And I'll ask our Parks Director, David Marquardt, to talk about a new program that we're going to be rolling out this week.
Right. Hi, welcome, Chief.
Good morning. So I guess what I'm about to tell you probably is nothing surprising. Everything I've got here in my notes is something we've already talked about over the last several weeks. Just a brief update, we are continuing to see a slight increase in our shootings. We're about 50% up overall in our shootings without injury. With that said, we're about even with our injuries related to shootings. Obviously, we had some concerns related to the fireworks. The majority of those incidents were related to about 200 to 300 what I would call young teenagers, 13 to 16, that were roaming the downtown area unsupervised. They were eventually removed from Rosie Park Circle, where they were creating problems, created smaller groups, were pushed to other parts of the fireworks viewing areas, and we did eventually have a shooting over in the Mount Vernon and Pearl area, which we believe was somewhat of a retaliatory from some comments that were made earlier when they were all gathered in the Rosa Park Circle area. So about 10 minutes after that, we did have another shooting that we don't really believe was related to the fireworks, but was in the outskirts of the fireworks-related area. We believe that is, again, not related to the earlier fight, completely separate from the fireworks, although it was in the fireworks area. And we are investigating both those incidents. We're getting some cooperation on one, not so much on the other one. So one of the things our investigators are doing is we are actively investigating these pretty much 24/7 as information comes in. We are getting some tips, which we are working actively, and we will continue to do so. Also announced at our press conference at Joe Taylor Park that we'd be doing additional patrols in the neighborhoods. We are doing that. It's not a ton. We're putting about 6 officers out daily, depending on the hours. And the efforts are basically in those areas of concern, and they are basically patrolling the neighborhoods for engagement opportunities. They're not necessarily out there for enforcement, but obviously if they see something, they will take action. So.
Good morning. We are in the process of piloting and developing a framework for 3 new initiatives, expanding park programming and recreational opportunities, implementing some new community events in each of our 3 wards across the city, and building a new pilot program called the Park Ambassador Program that went out this morning as a part of a press release. We are looking to hire people from within neighborhoods to be park ambassadors. And really, their duties will essentially be assisting park users with relevant information and directions, connecting park users to existing or upcoming programs and events, removing trash as needed, engaging with youth while they are active in the park, and reporting maintenance and repair needs that may be observed while being in those park spaces. As a part of that press release this morning, there was a job link to an application site on the city's webpage. I've noticed already we've got 2 applicants that have submitted their resumes and information. So I think this should be successful. We are looking forward to implementing these 3 priority areas.
Thank you. So again, I wanted the commission to have the report for cure violence, but in the absence of them, not just wait on what we can philosophically talk about implementing, but what we're doing right now to address some of the known issues that we have. And I think when we met at Joe Taylor Park, first of all, let me also thank the community. In addition to the chief and the efforts of the police department to help keep our community safe, let me thank the community members for coming out at Joe Taylor Park to offer their support, their concern about improving the health and safety of Grand Rapids, and I also thank the commissioners who were able to make it there in support as well. One of the things we also talk about, the police department needs direly, is the cooperation of the residents in terms of reporting any information that would lead to the solving of these crimes. And so the number that was shared in terms of if people certainly call 911, call the police department if you have information to share, but if you're concerned and want to remain anonymous, please call Silent Observer at 616-774-2345. So with that, I am going to pause and see if there are any comments about what we are doing currently or anything that we should prepare Cure Violence to be able to address when they come to us on the 23rd.
All right, Commissioner?
I'll just quickly say thank you to the city manager for hosting the press conference and bringing a variety of people to the park to talk about this issue. Thank you for making it a priority, and to the chief as well and his team and everybody, city staff. There are so many people there, and it's been very inspiring to see so many people talk about wanting to be a part of finding solutions internally. And I'd also like to just thank Huntington Bank for seeing that there was a need and reaching out and joining us and funding a program this summer in efforts to reduce violence by creating more job opportunities. Since yesterday's press release, I've gotten another contact from another corporation, and I think we're scheduled to meet next week and they're asking the same question: what is it that they can do? So I think hopefully we'll see a lot of public-private partnerships out of this, so that people will recognize that the reduction of violence is all hands on deck. It needs an all-hands-on-deck approach, and there are things that anyone can do to help us in the effort of making sure that our community is safe. Thank you.
Yeah, and Commissioner, not to put you on the spot, but I know you also were a part of the Safe Pitch Night, and that some awards were given out, again, really focused on violence prevention. Do you want to just share, for those of us who were not able to be there, or you want to share who received those awards and what we'll see from that effort?
Yeah, absolutely. So Asante, be ready. Be ready. So that Tuesday we did host a pitch night, and we provided 3 or 4 awards, and a variety of organizations. So LifeQuest Ministries was one of them. And you talk about the others.
Life Quest Ministries, $10,000 to do recreational activities and mentoring at their facility. $2,500 to a Giant Steps program. They are also providing a mentoring opportunity. Another $2,500 to Belknap Neighborhood Association to develop a program, a pilot program for other neighborhood associations to take part of in reducing violence. And another, $5,000 was for the Giant Steps program, and $2,500 for,
Libet.
Libet, but I'm trying to think of the name of his
Yeah.
program, but Elijah Libet on Eastern Avenue has a program where mothers have placards of their children that have been lost to violence, and it's a very powerful exhibit of what violence can do to the community. So those are the things that were funded on that day. All of the appropriated funds were not allocated, so we are trying to have another pitch night sometime in August, trying to get that together now.
Great, great, thank you.
And I'm sorry, ma'am, I'd like to say, though, that we also have 3 programs. Before we've had this rash of violence, there are 3 recreational mentoring programs funded through the SAFE Task Force. That's $107,000. Realism is Loyalty is mentoring high-risk youth. We have the Nehemiah Project. They have a GED program and a job program, 125 students or 125 young people. And then the last one is our own LEAD program. We are supplementing 10 students to be a part of that program also.
Yeah, great, thank you. And we're supporting Seeking Safety along with a number of other initiatives and supporting our neighborhood associations in their crime prevention efforts, so thank you.
And Mayor, one other comment. Let me also thank the school district for their partnership, as well as Ms. Marquardt mentioned about increasing our presence in parks. The school district this summer has also often offered to help with more visibility in terms of park presence, and their security team will be helping us to make sure our residents feel safe. So I by no means want to minimize what has occurred. We do take these matters very seriously, and I do expect the police department to enforce our law, and also we do need the cooperation of the residents. There are a couple of other things that were also discussed last year. I think that we talked about as violence reduction methods, and one of the incidents that the department dealt with in the past couple of weeks dealt with replica weapons, and it was a BB gun issue. And I think we talked previously, and I asked the city attorney and her team to help us develop a local ordinance that might help us in addressing some of these issues that, if not, our officers exercise a great deal of restraint in dealing with these issues with replica weapons. We've seen in other communities where there has been loss of life because of that. And so we want to make sure whenever there are people, both adults and youth, using those irresponsible, that we have the ability to enforce the law to the extent as possible. So I've asked the city attorney to look at that, and her and her team are working on that, and she might want to share her thoughts at this time.
Excuse me. Thank you, City Manager. So we've been reviewing since earlier this year our firearms ordinance, which is very limited. And so it addresses firearms. And so what our new proposed ordinance will address, and that's in its first draft form, it'll add in pneumatic guns and replica guns. And so what it would do is ban the discharge and the brandishing of the pneumatic guns as well as firearms. And it will ban the brandishing of replica guns. And then it'll also require that the replica guns have the proper markings, because part of the problem is they look so much like guns and people don't have them marked. And because we don't have a law that addresses that currently, then I don't think people take it as serious. So what the new ordinance will do is require those markings on replica guns. And it'll also require anyone under 16 years old to have, be under the supervision of a parent. The pneumatic guns are what includes the BB guns and the paint guns. And so we're going to say, no, you can't brandish those in a public place. And if you are in possession of those young people under 16, then you have to be under the supervision of a parent. And then the other thing that it will add is support of the police department is that if they are in violation of having the pneumatic guns or the replica guns, and police officers ask them for them, then it'll be against the law to refuse to relinquish those guns. The other thing that we're looking at is because our overall ordinance is outdated, so we'll update our ordinance, take out some language that's outdated and shouldn't be in there, but we're also taking a look at what is it that we can do to strengthen our overall firearms ordinance. It's very limited because of federal and state law, but we're searching very diligently what is it that we can do locally to strengthen our firearms ordinance. And hopefully, our next meeting, be able to discuss that with you and get a feel for the direction that you want us to go in and some of those new things that we can do.
Thank you. And Mayor, as I conclude, again, I want to thank the department particularly for the level of preparedness that they demonstrated on during the 4th of July events. We had almost 100 officers out during that event, and the ability for them to respond so quickly to those circumstances demonstrates a level of preparedness. This is not uncommon, unfortunately as it is not uncommon for large gatherings for these things to occur. The chief did indicate it had occurred previously, but this is certainly not something that we want to see this happen routinely in our community. But when it does occur, I think the level of response that you saw from our police department shows how prepared our officers are in mitigating these circumstances.
Yeah, thank you, well said. Thank you for that update. And City Attorney, thank you. I know we've been talking about replica guns for months now, so I'm happy to see that something is going to move forward soon. Yeah, thank you. All right, Commissioners, any other questions? All right, that will take us to our next item, and this is a resolution approving the request from 150 Ottawa Hotel Development for a B Hotel liquor license to be issued at 140 Ottawa Northwest.
So moved.
Support.
All right, hello, welcome.
Thank you. 150 Ottawa Hotel Development LLC did submit their application in February to convert an existing tavern license to the Class B hotel liquor license. They will be using that at 140 Ottawa Avenue Northwest, and it has been reviewed and approved by all required departments.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to an update on the Kent County Land Bank Authority transition, and I'll turn this over to Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong.
Thank you. We'll have a brief update here as soon as I can clear the prior PowerPoints and get to where I want to be. All right. So I was before you, Mayor and Commission, in January to talk about the what had been going on with the land bank, and at that time, at that time, we were dealing with the action by the County Board of Commissioners to shut down the land bank. So you can see in the dark face type the events that had happened prior to our January meeting. And then January, we had our first update. And then in February, we began meetings both with the Kent County Land Bank Authority and also with the Michigan Land Bank Fast Track Authority to see about replacement services. And then that met, I had a couple meetings, we had a couple meetings with the land bank. And then in March, there was a group of us that met with the Michigan Land Bank Fast Track Authority that included the city manager, the mayor, Commissioner Jones, and myself, City Attorney Hitchcock, and others to make a presentation about what a future could be. And we're working with them on developing that future now. So what have we accomplished since January? So we have been working with the Kent County Land Bank Authority to plan transition. They've been exceptionally cooperative and helpful, working with Mr. Allen and Mr. Parrish. Treasurer Parrish has been a joy, and they've been very, very helpful. We've been thinking about and rethinking how we do property management, so you'll see a couple items in just a moment that we'll ask you to work with. that has to do with how we do property management on a going forward basis. We've paused action on the Affordable Housing Community Fund until we figure out exactly how we want to make it most valuable for producing affordable housing in our community, and we're in the process of doing that now. As I mentioned earlier, we've opened talks with the Land Bank Authority, and we've also worked to incorporate the transition from the Kent County Land Bank to the Michigan Fast Track Authority into our strategic plan. And we're working on the housing practice leader concept, and we're developing a path for the 2019 foreclosures. Things we still have to do is there are some 2 affordable housing units that are that need to be developed under the current contract with the Kent County Land Bank Authority, and we're looking very good for that. We want to complete discussions with the Michigan Land Bank Fast Track Authority on our proposed future relationship, and I will bring you forward a agreement with them sometime in probably the next quarter, and that'll be in place by the time the current agreement with the Kent County Land Bank Authority has ended. We will maintain control of the buildable properties that are currently in the Kent County Land Bank inventory, and we'll make sure that there is an appropriate process for transitioning those, and also then their redevelopment. And we'll continue in complete implementation of the housing practice leader concept. Sure.
Can you go back to that slide, Eric?
Yes, I can.
So is 56 buildable properties the entirety of the properties under control of the land bank in the city of Grand Rapids, or?
No, those are the properties that we know we will be getting back, that we've specifically reserved and will be getting back. So in the meantime, you might recall there were 165 properties.
Yeah,
probably the
I was
number
gonna,
you have
that's
in
was
your
gonna be
head.
my follow-up question.
Yeah, and so the number will be somewhere between 165 and 56, but the Kent County Land Bank has been doing a really good job of selling split lots or side lots to neighboring properties, so they've been working to reduce that inventory. They've been developing affordable housing, so you might recall that they had 3 modular units that were being constructed at about the time of the Kent County announcement. Well, now since that time, they've developed another 10 that are in the process now of being constructed. And some properties that didn't have restrictions on them have been sold for redevelopment to other owners. And there are other transactions that have happened. So we're monitoring what they're doing. We're working with them. We know we'll get 56 back. These are all buildable properties that can be redeveloped for affordable housing that we'll be getting back. There are others that they're working to reduce their inventory before they close.
So the 3 properties that had the modular homes, have those 3 sold?
I'm not sure yet whether they've all sold or not. We can find out.
Okay, it'd be nice to get like a full update on
Sure.
what happened to the 168.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I just haven't seen any spreadsheet lately. I know Commissioner Park, who serves on the land bank, I'm sure he has that information, but he's out of town and so unable to fill us in, but maybe even a written update to the full commission would be helpful.
I can do that.
So,
Thank
okay.
you.
Commissioners, Commissioner Kelly?
Well, I just would encourage us all to tour one of those modular homes. I toured one on 6B, and honestly, I couldn't tell the difference. Not that I'm an expert, but it looked just like the other homes in the neighborhood. Didn't have a garage, but it had a nice backyard, nice driveway, and it was really nice. I'd be surprised if it hasn't sold. It was a really nice house.
Yeah. They're well-built homes.
Good.
Yeah.
Eric, I know, are you done with your presentation? Was this the end?
Yes.
Okay,
I could go to the last page if you like. So.
Well, look at I didn't want to jump the gun.
Oh, I was there, then I came back at the end.
I had some to back up, so.
So, I know that there were some properties that the land bank sold, that they sold prior to when they were supposed to sell them. And in response to that, they were then going to provide properties to us because they sold properties. And I don't know the outcome of that. So it may be a part of the same thing you're asking for, Mayor, is to kind of get a feel of where we landed.
Yep.
My hope would be that if they sold properties that they should not have sold at the time when they were sold, that it just wouldn't be one for one, that on the back end of that, that there would be some gain for the city for them selling properties that should not have been sold when they were sold. That's
We
one
we
question.
believe we've worked out an acceptable
Resolution,
solution to that.
okay.
So, and we can include that in the memo.
Okay, great. And then the other question is, I know that there have been a couple citizens who have come forward asking questions about the land bank, and in light of this change, if whatever the future holds, if it could include going back to including an auction for the public to be able to bid. And I don't know if that's something that the Michigan Land Bank can provide. But I think they were specifically talking about for ownership purposes, so I don't know if if a bid could be structured where it's only those who are looking to own the properties could bid, but I just wanted to make sure that that was on your radar because it did come forward, and I think someone had asked for information about the land bank and things of that nature and what are the next steps, so.
And so one other question, Eric. So in our conversations with the Michigan Land Bank, when do we hope to have some resolution there and a potential partnership with the Michigan Land Bank?
So I had a conference call with them right before the 4th of July, and I expect to have contracts probably within the next quarter. So
Okay.
probably look late summer, fall, before we have an agreement.
Okay. And Commissioners, you'll recall, there's some real value in working with the land bank because they can clear title and they have access to environmental remediation. And so there's some tools that they possess that are very helpful in redeveloping, particularly these difficult properties that often come back through foreclosure. And I know many of us have examples all over the city that the land bank was instrumental in making those redevelopments happen. So we want to make sure that we have access to that tool.
Yes, we
And
do.
I do know that when they put them on the market, they did have a period for
21 days.
ownership before it can be purchased by. So maybe maybe that is the solution, but I just want to make sure whatever it is that we talk about that so that whoever was inquiring, they would know.
Yeah, so the properties that the land bank has sold on the market actually are sold on the market. So their private parties have an opportunity to acquire those properties. So-
And we did have, when they were put on, there was 21 days where it was sold to
Ownership
ownership.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
And they weren't, I think, I do recall, when I first became a commissioner, that there had been some concerns about people being able to afford to meet the requirement, because I think they were requiring that you have so much in the bank and things like that, and people were like, no, usually we just, over time, get this work done. And I think they relaxed the policy. You would know better than I as a former board member, but they relaxed the policy so that people buying them could afford to buy them at a lower rate and over time take care of the changes. So we would want to make sure that that's something that the Michigan Land Bank would carry over. I don't know if you're trying to mirror the contracts, that one to the one that we had with the Kent County Land Bank, but those are just some factors that I remember being concerns that were addressed at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner?
Commissioner, if I heard you correctly, are we saying that once the land bank, Kent County Land Bank acquires property, that the city can buy that property from the land bank?
No, it was citizens could buy it. Yeah, they would put them on the MLS, just like any other home that would be listed for sale, and any citizen could purchase it. And at the time, there was a 21-day window that those who were looking to buy it as an owner-occupied home, they had 21 days before it would then go out for those who would be acquiring it for rental property purposes.
But Eric, the city can acquire property, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, and so the way the land bank is acquired properties currently is we have, through the tax reversion process, have acquired property and then transferred it to the land bank. And then they clear title, and then the property is coming, and you'll see an example of that here when we get to the next agenda item.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're acquiring some in our next
Contract with
item.
them to clear title and do other services for us. And then when they come back, we will then work to transfer those properties to affordable housing developers, so nonprofit developers for developing of affordable housing. So that's how it's worked, but also the land bank, any land bank can acquire property. We will reacquire the properties that are currently in the land bank inventory, and I'm proposing that we transfer them to, with the same restrictions, to the Michigan Land Bank.
Yep, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Thank you for this update. I know many of us had questions about it, so appreciate that. And it is related to a couple items before us. So the next one is a resolution authorizing acquisition of 5 2019 tax foreclosed properties from the Kent County Treasurer, and authorizing the sale of the same to the Kent County Land Bank Authority, and approving a property service agreement with the Kent County Land Bank for a total cost not to exceed $108,536.24. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
Support.
All right. So Eric, do you, or,
John was going to take care of it. I'm just
All
trying to
right.
get out of his way.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So
morning.
you did hear a little bit of kind of the background of this. Contained in your memo is actually both an update on last year's process and then details about the proposed process for this year. So you know, over the years, we've had a relationship with the Kent County Land Bank. Beginning in 2013, we would acquire all of the tax foreclosed properties and transfer them to the Kent County Land Bank. That sort of relationship evolved over the years, as did the real estate market, and the number of tax foreclosures dropped precipitously every year. So in 2018, the process changed significantly as a result of all of those sort of environmental forces. So in 2018, the Kent County Land Bank Authority was only a service provider for the city. There were 21 total tax foreclosed properties. 5 of those were vacant lots. There was 1 side lot and 15 homes. During that process, the city's economic and community development departments worked collaboratively to put out an RFP to nonprofit housing developers. There were home funds set aside to assist in the completion of some of these more difficult projects, and nonprofits had proposed projects on 16 of those properties. So to date, the resolution authorizing the transfer of those properties was in December of last year. So we're now 7 months into this process. 9 of the properties have been sold. 2 are closing, hopefully in the next week or so. Nonprofits are maintaining 5 additional properties that they have options on. 7 of the projects are underway or largely completed, consistent with what was proposed. 1 of the projects has been abandoned by the original nonprofit, but is being evaluated by another at this point. 3 of the properties have home funding attached to them, and they will result in 3 new and 1 renovated unit, all for affordable housing. So updates on individual properties, if you're interested, are in the memo, but I won't go through all of them individually. The city still owns 5 properties. 4 of them were vacant lots, and 1 had a house on it that we have demolished since acquiring it. So I guess I'll stop there briefly to see if there are any questions on the 2018 tax foreclosures.
Great, thank you. So Commissioners, in the packet, within the memo, there's an update, and it breaks down the address and the nonprofit organization, what they're proposing, and then the status of that development. So you should have that, and then our city clerk just put it up on the wall there. So questions? All right.
So I'd like to thank you for all that work, Jono. That's been a heavy lift, I know. And I also thank all the nonprofit developers for, again, sitting down and working this out and picking properties that work for them. And I hope that's the process that we continue in the future. It's worked well in the past, and I think it speaks highly of them and their willingness to cooperate for the greater good. So, thank you.
It's a good partnership. Okay, so moving on then, in 2019, we largely continue in the same fashion. And again, the number of tax foreclosures has dropped. And so there are
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing,
Very good
correct?
thing.
For many different reasons. So there are 5 tax foreclosed properties that have homes on them. There are a couple additional properties that are side lots, and we are not recommending acquiring those for various reasons. Preliminary, so the 5 properties are included in your resolution, and the list of those properties have been provided to nonprofits, and we're beginning to evaluate them. There's initial interest in all of them by at least 1 nonprofit. And so the resolution attached to your memo authorizes various items, provides authority to acquire the tax foreclosures from the Kent County Treasurer, authority to sell these properties to the Kent County Land Bank Authority. It approves an agreement with the Kent County Land Bank Authority very similar to last year to provide the same services that were provided last year. Quiet title, ensuring the properties are vacant, maintaining the properties, cooperating with us in the application for a brownfield plan if necessary, and then selling the properties back to Grand Rapids, City of Grand Rapids when the services are complete. The cost for all of this is estimated not to exceed about $108,000. That's $51,000 for acquisition from the county, $15,000 in fees that are due related to water and sewer, nuisance fines, summer property taxes becoming due. Related to the agreement with the land bank, we estimate a not to exceed amount of $22,000. Because the land bank is being dissolved, they have requested that we place that in escrow and allow them to draw down on that over time. So we anticipate entering into an escrow agreement for that. And then an additional $20,000 for interim maintenance. So, for example, there's a property with holes in the roof. We need to fix that so it doesn't get worse and can be salvaged. And then maintaining the properties in accordance with all the requirements of property ownership in Grand Rapids. So between now and when the land bank completes the services, we'll continue to work with nonprofits to evaluate projects with them, both from a capacity and a funding perspective, all with the goal of renovating these for affordable housing.
Great, thank you. So I have two follow-up questions then. For these 5 properties, do we anticipate that all 5 of them will be redeveloped by nonprofit organizations?
Yes.
Okay. And then my other question, for the non-buildable lots or side lots that we're not purchasing, so remind me, those then will be acquired by the county. They'll put it up for auction, but if they don't sell, they'll stay in the county inventory, and then is the county responsible for maintaining those?
Yeah, ultimately, I mean, the county, obviously, treasurer forecloses on properties all over the county and has more than just these 3 additional properties in Grand Rapids. So these are properties that very clearly belong with an adjacent property. I think some of them are literally 5 feet by 10 feet.
Okay.
And so the county will work and notify those adjacent property owners that the property is foreclosed and that they have the ability to acquire them.
Okay.
So since they're doing that across the county, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to acquire that and try to do it in Grand Rapids.
Yeah, good. I agree. All right, commissioners, any other questions? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, it carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution accepting the assignment of the right and title and promissory note in an original face amount of $70,000 from the Kent County Land Bank Authority for property located at 303 Donald Place Southeast.
Support.
All right, we'll have Mr. Klooster tell us about this one as well.
So in separate but related, in addition to all the tax foreclosures that were transferred to the land bank over the years, you recall that in 2016, we also transferred all of our excess property to the land bank. Various requirements were placed on that transfer depending on what type of property it was. Relevant to this item, buildable properties had a requirement that the land bank would build or cause to be built housing for affordable for families that required affordable housing, and the restriction related to that transfer was at the 100% AMI, or area median income. There were 2 properties on Donald Place that had that 100% AMI restriction, and the land bank has constructed 3 units of housing on those 2 properties. The description of the process in our agreement was such that the land bank would record what we call a soft second mortgage related to these properties. The value of that mortgage was to be equal to the difference between the appraised value, so what the market value of a home is, and what the sale price is. The sale price is determined based on what the family can afford, based on their income. And so the difference between the value of a home and the sale price is the value of the second mortgage. In this case, the second mortgage value is $70,000. The second mortgage is secured by a promissory note that requires that the mortgage be paid under certain circumstances, primarily if the buyer who's receiving this subsidy via the second mortgage sells the home, anytime in the next 10 years, a portion of the promissory note needs to be repaid. This is all consistent with our agreement that was approved by the City Commission and the Kent County Land Bank Authority. The problem here is that the land bank is being dissolved, and so they are the holder of the promissory note. By assigning it to the city receives the ability to get any payment that comes due on the promissory note anytime in the next 10 years. And so our attorneys have worked with the title companies and the lender to prepare this assignment. And closing on this property is scheduled for tomorrow at 4 o'clock.
Okay, great. Commissioner O'Connor?
Quick question on this. What was the cost of construction on that property?
It depends how you define that, but it exceeds the value of the property.
So $70,000. I mean, I get the contract that was in place. We're going to give away $70,000. We're picking a winner and a loser. Like, we decided that we had a rule. A property cost X to construct. It appraised for whatever it appraised for in the market. There's a delta that exists there. And we're going to pick one person to essentially give $70,000 away to over the course of 10 years.
So to be clear, there's nobody is writing a check for $70,000 to close on this transaction. The subsidy is being provided through a loss, right, by the builder. I think that the way the contract was written, there was not an expectation that the subsidy would be this large in the instances where property is being developed by the land bank. Because of various challenges with this property and the AMI restrictions, we are ending up obviously with a property that appraises at a pretty high price. And so in order to make it affordable, the delta is $70,000 in this instance.
And my understanding, just in follow-up to that, is that the land bank, because of other properties that they developed and sold at a significant profit, it's offsetting this loss. Is that right? I wish Commissioner Part was here, but am I getting that right?
The land bank has the ability to float this as they wind down, yes.
Okay. Commissioner?
Well, and this goes to...
It's Second Ward.
Yes, it is in the Second Ward, and I'm happy to see that it is going to be affordable because that was the arrangement and the expectation all along. It's unfortunate, and I think that perhaps there was more put into the construction that necessary, that it should have probably been sold to somebody who could then do some of that on their own, and over their own time. But this is the situation that we're in, and it's very unfortunate. I'm glad that I'm hoping that we'll have more control over this in the future as we work with the Michigan Land Bank.
But I believe that some of that cost was city-created cost in terms of our requirements to redesign the property multiple times to meet historic preservation requirements, as well as some of our unrealistic expectations about how we build affordable housing in what capacity. And so I'm going to vote no on this because I just think this is not a good precedent, and this is not, we need to support and build affordable housing, but it does not need to, it cannot be created in certain places because we wish it could be there. It's like it has to be a more methodical process in creating it, and it's just not, it's just, potentially the city's losing $70,000 on this property.
Good. I appreciate that perspective. Going back though, and having served on the Kent County Land Bank Board at the time when we came up with this agreement, there was, even from a board member on that body, an understanding that we would be able to meet this guideline and sell properties to families at a certain AMI and have them be affordable in the development. So it is unfortunate, this property and a couple others, but when that agreement was drafted, there was an understanding that the land bank would be able to meet it.
Well, I also think that's the understanding that we mean this property appraised for a value. I was a real estate appraiser for 10 years of my life. I mean, when a property has an appraised value, it's based on comparable data for sales in the neighborhood. So would it not have been smarter to sell this property for appraised value and use the proceeds to support affordable housing in another endeavor in another location? Well,
If I may, I think that that's what we struggle with, Commissioner, and you know that we had this conversation before, but the proposal was to, if we did what you suggest, to take that money and then put it in low-income housing in a low-income neighborhood, and we are trying to avoid doing that. We really want to do what we can around mixed-income housing and not concentrate poverty, which has been the problem for decades. That it's extraordinarily difficult to unwind, but we're starting to see some examples of that, certainly in larger developments, which are easier to do, and they are heavily subsidized. But that's the goal, and we did have a promise, and I just think that we need to keep that promise.
One other question about this. The other properties on Donald Place, have those sold?
The single-family detached one has sold, and that was sold at market rate. The other one is, the other attached unit, the one attached to this one, is being marketed with a similar format
Okay.
to this.
Okay, thanks. All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Hey.
It carries. All right, next we have consideration of adoption of a resolution approving an MOU with Grand Valley Metro Council for the river restoration. I'll turn this over to Mr. DeLong.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor. Today I have for you a really big fly. I have for you a MOU that has to do with an agreement between us and the Grand Valley Metropolitan Council, who has been a great partner with us for the river restoration project. And what this would provide for is our ability to direct bill the Natural Resource Conservation Service for the portion of the project that is being funded under what's called the RCPP grant, which is the lower reach of the project below Bridge Street down to Fulton Street. The amount of the project is estimated to be about $4.1 million, or at least the grant portion of the amount, and we would be under the MOU with Grand Rapids Whitewater, the entity that does the contracting for construction and administers construction. So this is really a fiduciary agreement, essentially, that allows us to direct bill for work that we would do in the future.
Great.
And I recommend its approval.
All right, thanks. And I see our partners from Grand Valley Metro Council here today who've been doing work and have been taking the lead on the federal grants that we received. So thank you for being here and thank you for your work. Commissioners, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries.
Thank you.
All right, next is a resolution approving polling locations for the upcoming August 6th primary. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support?
All right, City Clerk, you want to tell us about this?
Yeah, according to the charter, I don't know why it's in there, but it's in there that the city commission has to approve the polling locations. And so everything's the same. What we do in a normal odd year election is any place, the election commission has already consolidated precincts for August and November. One change from previous is North Park School, with the issues that they had with lead and things. They had to close down and they were meeting at Grand Rapids University. They were anticipating being open like the day before election, and that's a little tight for them moving in. So we're gonna give them plenty of time. So for August and November, we are consolidating North Park School with North Lawn United Methodist Church in the 2nd Ward. So those, they'll be voting in the same location. We sent out postcards to everybody in the precinct where North Park is, and so that they know that they're in a different location. And then just on an update coming up for November, I'll bring this back to just, once again, in the 1st Ward, we're having issues up on top of the hill. KEC Oakley is now under the governance of KISD and not Grand Rapids Public Schools, so we can use it for August, but we can't use it for November. They don't have the clause in their contract to close the building like GRPS does. So, but I'm watching what's happening with absentee ballots, that we may be able to do some more of these joint precincts in different locations. But that's the update on that.
Great, thanks. I know absentees went out last week. I got mine.
There's a lot.
And hopefully we'll see some significant increase because of that. Okay, Commissioners, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, we have 4 more items, and I want to also remind you, I know we received an email about this, but we do have an executive session right after COW down in 6th floor to talk about labor negotiations, and so we'll try to move through these final items quickly. The next one is in follow-up to the discussion we had at our last meeting about putting together a task force on elected representation. So this is a resolution establishing a task force. Can I get a motion?
So moved?
All right. And Mr. Doug Matthews, who's taken the lead on this and has quite a bit of expertise just from his past experience in other cities. You want to provide this presentation and answer any questions?
I do, and I'll move it quickly. So last we talked, we had referenced pulling together a group of community members to take a look at some of the proposals that have been brought forward or suggested in terms of the governance structure. So based on my conversations and experience, this is the recommendation that we had to bring back, which is that each commissioner has an appointee. We have 3 invited seats. We wanted to specifically invite the 2 organizations who are bringing forward suggestions. And we felt it important that we have an academic resource as well, because there may be some research that's involved. The balance of the committee at that point would be appointed by the mayor. We want representation that reflects community diversity. And of course, you're going to have staff membership there in an ex officio capacity. There wouldn't be a participatory role there, but we want to make sure that we're available as a resource to the group. These are the topics as we understand them for consideration and deliberation. Of course, the task force may want to bring other things to the table. We don't know. One is the odd-even elections, as well as the primary election issues, single-member districts and/or expanded city commission representation, as well as the process for direct appointment versus special elections. I want to make sure that we have structured proceedings. We've talked about having a knowledgeable third-party facilitator so that there's no suggestion that somebody has a vested interest in the outcome. We'd convene in August. I think it's important that task force elect their own chair and their own vice chair, and we want them to have some ownership and some leadership of this activity. And we'd meet every 3 weeks starting in August. We were explicit in the resolution that you have that there would be 1 community meeting in each ward that would be open for public input and feedback. And we'd report back to the commission no later than December 17th. That should include recommendations that have fiscal, operational, and electoral evaluations to them. So we'd like to adopt the resolution, make those appointments in advance of the next meeting or by the next meeting so that we can start coordinating and scheduling locations, contacting those appointees, and get started. In the meantime, we're still working on potential facilitators. I've been in touch with some of my contacts through the Alliance for Innovation as well as ICNA to identify someone who would fit the bill, who'd do a good job for us on this.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, open up for questions. I'll first start by saying thank you for your work on this and the city staff who pulled this together based on our conversation last time. I think this is a thoughtful process moving forward as we look at potential significant changes to the structure of our local government. Any input, commissioners? Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I really appreciate us getting this underway because, there's been quite a bit of pressure on us and you've had so much on your plate, all of staff has, so it's no small effort to pull this together so quickly, so I really appreciate what you've gotten done to date, Doug. And can you give us a sense of how soon we need to get our recommendations in almost immediately?
Yeah, I sent out an email about that. It would be ideal in the next week to get your, some of you have already responded and sent me your recommendation. I'm going to hold off on my 2 appointments until I know who you all are wanting to recommend, and then we can identify for the 3 groups that we want to make sure have a dedicated seat. We can identify who we think is the best person to invite, who represents those voices.
And then as a follow-up, if you don't mind, the frequency with which people would likely meet looks like every 3 weeks because it is August. So I think we just need to be aware of that because it's a vacation time.
Yeah.
So.
We can also establish some online resources. In the past, we've had some resources where participants can post information, they can share information, they can actually have dialogue outside of the actual meeting so that we don't have to wait 3 weeks, then restart, then restart, then restart.
Wonderful.
So hopefully that'll help.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
is there a vetting process for the people we may want to be appointed to this position?
Criteria.
I would submit that the commissioners are the vetting process for the appointees that we're provided with.
Yeah, and then we'll bring, my intent and hope is that we could solidify a list of the 11 appointees and have that finalized at our next meeting, and then a formal letter with the specifics would go out to them, inviting them to participate. So this is not going to be a long-term, again, this is a short-term task force. Hopefully their work will be completed by the end of the year.
And one note I think that is important, and I should have included this, that the city clerk and I did meet with the Empower the Citizens group, and while we've made it clear that they'll be invited to participate, they've indicated that at this time they're not sure that they'll have a role.
Yeah, and we respect their decision to participate or not. So, Commissioner.
Mayor, so I know I submitted my name. If that person isn't available to make the commitment, I think, the timing of everything may be a factor, then you could just let me know and I have someone else in mind too.
Okay,
What
great.
if they have an alternate just in case?
So you want me to just submit my alternate now?
Sure.
I can do
Yep,
that.
yep. Great idea. All right, all right, Commissioners, any other questions? All right, and Mr. Matthews, you'll continue to take the lead on this? Is that right? Okay. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is an ordinance to repeal, let's see, yep. Ordinance to repeal Chapter 104 called Motion Picture Theaters of Title VII of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, our city clerk's office is taking the lead on this.
Yes, good morning. The item before you is proposing the repeal in its entirety of Chapter 104, Motion Picture Theaters. This is in relation to the pending adoption of the new indoor events ordinance, which will now encompass what was previously in Motion Picture Theaters ordinance.
All right, Commissioners, any questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution setting the date to consider amendment to sections of Articles 2 and 5 of Chapter 7 of Title I of the Grand Rapids City Code related to the position of Deputy Fire Chief in the Police and Fire Retirement System portion of the pension and retirement benefits. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
All right, and our CFO is here to tell us about this.
Good morning, everybody. So this is just basically a cleanup when the deputy fire chiefs were removed from the union last bargaining session. We never updated the pension ordinance, so this is scheduling a publication of it and for adoption at the next meeting. So really just cleanup language.
Okay, great. Any questions or comments, Commissioners? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution amending City Commission Policy 400-01. Can I get a motion?
So moved. Support.
All right, and our City Treasurer, Mr. Globinski, is here to tell us about this.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm sorry to bring this back to you so quickly, but we had another meeting with an investment manager that suggested a couple other policy shifts, and we are in agreement with them. Basically, what we're doing is we're moving our weighted average life. If you recall from the very start when City Treasurer Al Mooney was here, it was a 3-year. So we went from 3, 5, 7. 7 is our new suggestion because 7 will bridge the gap of most economic cycles, being a good cycle or down period. Also, what we're doing is striking some language that allows us, and we actually do invest in Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae items, but they have to be government entity sponsored. That means we're not doing private. It's not commercial mortgages. It's not backed by anything that the private sector is where we stay out of, and we stay out of derivatives. These are direct items that come from the federal government. The reason being is that we're identifying an area that we believe that we can actually gain some interest and actually have a bigger depth of and breadth of offerings.
Okay. All right, Commissioners, questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, John, for your work on this. All right, Commissioners, now, we need to go down for an executive session, into the Attorney's Office. And then we have 12:30 Economic Development Project Team. So those of you who serve on that with me, that is at 12:30. So can I get a motion to go into executive session?
Support.
All right, it's a voice call. Commissioner Jones? Yes. O'Connor? Yes. Lanier? Yes. Moody?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
And yes. All right.